Hi, welcome to Preps Plus Podcast, episode 10. It's just Jason and I this week. I'm Josh, sports editor. That's Jason, Preps reporter. We're here to break down all of the state playoff news coming up this week. WIAA likes to pack everything into one weekend in the spring. So there's a lot to break down, but on our 10th episode, we figure we break it all down and see how this goes. So we'll start with baseball. We have just one WIAA state baseball team left. That's the Wahkiakum Mules. Walk me through a little bit of their quarterfinal game and regional final matchup with the Toutle Lake Ducks. It sounded like that was a heck of a matchup.
It was, and you know, towards the tail end, I had a first couple graphs of my story written in that seventh inning. I started to wonder if I was going to have to control alt delete. The Ducks scored a couple runs there late. That was one of those games where the box score, looking at the hits and the runs, and you're kind of like, okay, how did this happen? How did one team score 6 with similar, and I think the way it was scored actually had the Ducks had more hits than the Mules, and the final score was still Mules 6, Ducks 3. So that was a game that could have gone either way. A few errors and a few close calls favored the Mules, to at very least to a degree, and it's not that the Mules didn't earn it, because they did. They played a terrific ball game, and they're heading into these final 2 games with some serious momentum and a real shot to win state. There's a good chance that if they make it to the state championship, they play Napavine, who they haven't had a whole lot of success against this year. The good news for them is they shouldn't be facing Wyatt Stanley, who's one of the top pitchers in the state. Guy throws, low 90s, and just he's dominant in the 2B. And so, if they do get that far, that's something that they have is, Stanley's going to will have pitched the day before in all likelihood. So, if they get there, they have a good shot, so it's something to be excited about. And here's the craziest thing about that team. A lot of the core players are young. You got a sophomore pitcher that plays really good. You got Ashton Niemeyer, who's an 8th grader. A few others, and there's regulars on the team who will be there for a long time. This is a team you're looking at as a possible state champion.
Right. Yeah, I think they definitely got there a year early, and even Zach Brown admitted as much after their district final loss to Adna, was that he may not have expected this team to get there this year. They maybe thought it was a year away. They had set the goal to get there, but they have an 8th grader playing first base who's one of their top performers, and you don't expect a guy like Ashton Niemeyer, despite being, coach's kid, to have the leadership skills, the maturity that he does. And they have, Santos Wright, who also drew the game-winning walk against Napavine in the district semis a couple weeks ago. And James Anderson, the sophomore ace, and Luke Brown, the sophomore. Just this group is so young, and yet they play a lot more mature than you would expect from so many youngsters, and it's cool to see. I think they have a good shot against Colfax in that opening round. Of course, when we talk about Wyatt Stanley being burned in that first game, most likely James Anderson, I would assume, be used in the state semifinal. And he's a phenomenal pitcher. I would say, definitely one of the candidates for our all area player of the year.
Yes.
He's what he's done as a sophomore southpaw has just been phenomenal. I'm most interested to see how the pitching matchups break down. Last year, you saw some coaches try to save their ace for the next day, but you got to win on the first day. Toutle Lake did that by throwing Zach Vetter against Friday Harbor in the opening. What have you heard from coaches as far as how they plan to use pitchers? I know you got to see the regionals, and it's in a similar way it's played with the back-to-back days.
Right.
It sounded like most teams threw their ace in that first game.
I mean, everybody's playing to win, and that's what it is right now. Is you have one game and one game only that you must win, and so you know. It's interesting. I wasn't aware that Stanley had been saved for Adna. Makes sense, and I think I hope for the Mules' sake that they don't follow that template,
right,
because Stanley is going to be tough to do anything against. And that's one thing with kind of as you're looking at the number 2 or 3 pitcher for a team. The Mules have Brown and Terrace Record they can throw out there anytime. They have options there. James Anderson is definitely the elite option, but the drop off there isn't, you know, statistically you see it, but when you watch the guys throw, there's not a whole lot of difference.
Right. I forget, did James pitch against Kettle Falls in the opener for Wahkiakum, or did they save him for Toutle Lake?
They saved him for Toutle Lake.
Right.
But that's right, they did save him for Toutle Lake.
I mean, you look at that, it was basically, you know, it's somewhat of a, you know, they're seeded into these games, but it's somewhat of a lucky draw. Napavine takes 3rd in districts and gets a much weaker team, whereas Adna has to throw Burdick against Kalama because Kalama finished 5th in districts, and so they get seeded up harder against a harder team. They have to burn their ace. Likely hurts them in the second one, whereas same thing with Wahkiakum Toutle Lake. What if that had been Vetter Anderson, or what if Wahkiakum had been matched up with a tougher team than Kettle Falls? What if they had been matched up with Friday Harbor? As far as that one goes, it makes sense as far as seeding. Toutle Lake was the 4th seed out of districts. Wahkiakum was the 2, so it makes sense that Wahkiakum would get the easier matchup and maybe get conservative pitcher, but it didn't make sense on the Napavine Adna side of things. You know, even a lot of people believed that Wahkiakum losing that district final put them in better position for advancing to the Final Four. And you saw that Adna ended up losing to Napavine, and I don't know if Wahkiakum would have done the same, but they certainly had a somewhat easier road having to face Kettle Falls and Toutle Lake.
Yeah, well, kind of like we were just saying, if you got to go against Wyatt Stanley, I mean, the same goes for James Anderson. He's not a guy you want to go against. You know, and again, that's Toutle didn't get their hits and their runs off Anderson. It was in the final inning after Anderson had been pulled, which, by the way, made it through, I believe it was 5 innings with like 60 pitches.
Right.
You know, you're going fewer than, or just a little bit more than 10 pitches an inning in high school in general. But, you know, being a 2B school is something you don't really expect.
Right. And it's important for pitchers to go deep so that they don't burn, you know, there's only so much depth, you know, at the 2B level. You're not having, you know, for some of these teams, I think Wahkiakum does have, you know, 3-4 good pitchers that are capable, but none are on the level of Anderson.
Right.
Same thing with Napavine after Stanley. There's capable pitchers that can come in and get outs, but they're not going to shut down teams like you know, the top pitchers are going to do. So you know what's interesting, as much as we bagged on the RPI for basketball, it really could have come in handy if done correctly for the baseball season, where you're not having games in which, like, if Kalama would have lost their seeding game, they would have had an easier matchup. They went out and won it. Now PL ended up, you know, losing over on the east side as well, but you never know what would have happened. It shouldn't be that way, where coaches are looking at a matchup situation saying, would it be better to lose this district game? And that's, I think, where RPI could come into play, and I'm glad WI is at least considering it for other sports, but it has to be done correctly.
But yeah, I mean, that's fair, but then the flip side is that you could say that either way. And, you know, in the playoffs, it doesn't matter what sport, what level, it could be, you know, little league to major leagues. The teams that you don't expect, in rare instances, you know, the team that you expect to win does. You know, this year we had the Patriots win a Super Bowl the same year, or the same just after the Cubs won a World Series, the two favorites to win it all,
right.
The majors are professionals, but that even at that level, it's rare.
Right.
And the same goes for college, for high school. So I think we could talk about RPI, or just sending a team in on a league record, an overall record. And I think the discussion would stay the same, where, oh, well, this wasn't the better team, but they still won, or this really good team didn't get in because another team was in a weaker division. At the end of the day, that sometimes a champion is not always the best team, but they are the champion.
Right. I think a big thing of note is that the Central 2B League, as you wrote in your story this weekend, is probably maybe deserving of more than two teams at the state level. I mean, no offense to Colfax and the other Final Four team is spacing my mind right now. Is it Northwest Christian or Tri-Cities Prep, something like that?
Tri-Cities Prep is in there.
Right, so yeah, Tri-Cities Prep. No offense to those teams, but I think Adna probably, I mean, they won the district, and yet Napavine and Wahkiakum are in there. I think those three teams are probably better than the rest of the state. So it's crazy to think how stacked the Central 2B League, and even I think that it's a testament to the teams that did advance through these things. Toledo lost to Wahkiakum by 1 run in the district opener. Had that gone the other way, maybe we'd be looking at Toledo in a Final Four after taking eighth place in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, that league is just anybody can win at any time. Go out and watch a 2B game at Centralia this week. I mean, they are good baseball teams. They're fun to watch. They run the bases well. They field well. They pitch well. I mean, they're fun games to watch. So don't discount it for being 2B baseball. I mean, this is always, the last 2 years I've really enjoyed watching 2B baseball, and they'll put on a show at Fort Forest like they did last year.
Yes, they will.
Flipping over to softball, where pitching matchups maybe matter a little bit more, except the fact that pretty much everyone has their go-to pitchers, and they go out and pitch. Toutle Lake is going over to our only team going over to the east side, and they'll take on DeSales, who they topped in the state semifinals last year pretty handily. But more interesting is that a matchup possibly with Adna is going to take place in the state quarterfinals. I mean, or if somehow both lose, that would be a loser-out game too. I think that's the most interesting matchup. You were out at Toutle Lake practice today. What's the Ducks feeling like right now after kind of slipping up in districts, and how are they proceeding to try to capture their 4th state title in 5 years?
I mean, they're excited. They've been there, and this is a team with senior leadership. I was doing an interview with Britzy Hawkett, Shelby Levang, and that was less on softball and more on them, but you could see how excited they were. This is their final state tournament as Toutle Lake students, Toutle Lake student athletes, and it's just written on their face. They don't need any under eye face paint. You can see they're ready. And so I mean, I think that's really, in any sport, having that mentality is really all you need.
Right.
They know how to swing a bat, they know how to throw a ball. It's just about being ready, having been there, being able to be calm in the moment. And so, kind of like you said, I certainly expect them to win the first round and remain competitive throughout. I think of all the schools that we have in our area here, they probably have the toughest road to winning state. But they've been there, so
right.
we probably, this is probably, that same sentence has probably been uttered over the last 5 years.
Right. And what's interesting is people keep discounting that, and even me to an extent, after they lost at districts in the state semis, it was like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be their 4th state title in 5 years. And then I go, they've won 3 state titles in 4 years, and I don't know if there was a year where they were considered the favorites going in.
Right.
I mean, what a story it would be to see Britzy Hockett, in a long line of that family having success, to cap her career with a state title. I mean, Shelby Levain was the game-winning hit last year, and they just have players that tend to step up at important times. I remember last year I was sitting in the dugout of their state championship game, and Kelso, or Ashlyn Dean comes off the mound, and she's like, she just got out of a jam. She's like almost in tears, just like so stressed about it's tie game with Adna, and Sam Woodley comes up to her and is like, you got this, you're good. And they just have those leaders that tend to step up and just give the team that composure they need to step up in big situations. So, it'll be exciting to see what they're able to do as the underdog somehow. I don't know how they continue to be the underdog, but they continue to be as such. Another underdog that put on some theatrics at by districts, the Kelso softball team. You got to see them in their first 2 rounds. How are they playing right now? They made it to that by district semifinal before losing a 10-inning game to a team that lost to Yelm, perennial power, 1-0. So clearly they're up there with the best and among the state favorites. How are they playing right now? How are they feeling?
Well, I mean, I think they're a team who has obviously, with a 10-0 league record, had good fortune over here, but they've wanted better competition. When you go 10-0, you're like, all right, this might be getting a little bit easy, and not to bag on any other team in the area, but they were 10-0, so. Now they're there. Now they have this improved competition, and they have a good team, obviously, and going 10 innings in a softball game in 85-degree heat, 90-degree heat, that says a lot about their competitive spirit. That they're willing to continue to grit it out and not give up. And that's tough when you have got 1 run. It came in the 7th inning,
right?
And you keep going for another 3. That's really tough to do.
Right.
I don't think most people understand just how hard that can be. So they're ready. They face I think that might be the toughest game they'll play all year for the rest of the year. Obviously there's only a couple more, but. They're in it and can't count them out.
And they always step up in huge ways. I mean, you saw freshman Capri Franzen hit a game-tying homer with 2 outs and 2 strikes in the 7th inning. I mean, I know they went on to lose that game, but what kind of confidence does it give a team to know that, maybe there's magic at the end of the tunnel?
Right.
To have that experience of, being down 1-0 to a pitcher who, is one of the best in the state, and absolutely, she had 20 strikeouts on the day, who absolutely just dominated, and then to have, little freshmen step up and just smack a game-tying homer in the 7th with 2 outs and 2 strikes. That's just crazy. I won't count them out of anything.
Right.
Bonnie Lake's an incredible team.
Yes.
They took Yelm to a 1-0 score, and Yelm is, that's probably the state favorite, I would assume.
Right.
So if the way Kelso's the way the state run kind of lines up too might be in their favor. They play Edmonds, Woodway, possibly Gig Harbor or Redmond in the second round. They already beat Gig Harbor.
Yeah.
Then they would probably, if they were to make it, they could face Bonnie Lake again in the state semis. And it sets up in a similar way to by districts if they were to make it that far.
Right.
I think they have the talent. They got the pitching. They have GSHL MVP Sadie Harris, who you dubbed Miss May earlier this month.
Yep.
And maybe Capri Franzen needs to start to have a nickname as well.
Seriously. No, well, and here's the incredible thing about, the couple games they had last weekend, Sadie Harris wasn't a factor. And to think that they win 2 and then go on to lose in 10, but keep it close and have one of their best hitters not not have her best games, that says a lot about how good a team is. Because at some point, Sadie Harris is going to hit a couple, big hits, whether it be a home run, base hit, whatever. It's going to happen.
Right.
So, it just, it's just a matter of when, what moment is that going to be, and what's the score going to be, and so.
And you talked on last week's podcast, and you applauded Megan Holt and Jordan Reagan's success in the field when they're not in the circle. Jordan Reagan had a game-saving home run catch that she plowed through the fence in the 8th inning of that game.
Right.
I mean, they are a deep team. You have Allie Holt going to LCC, Jordan Reagan, Southern Oregon. There are college players on this team. They are deep. I think they have what it takes. I mean, there's some talented teams out there, but if Kelso winds up in a state final at the end of the week, I wouldn't be shocked.
No.
And then, of course, on the Oregon side of things, we have state's first round starting tomorrow on Wednesday. Rainier softball is the number 1 seed going into that, and that makes their road just nice and shiny.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the 16 seed in the first round, and they don't have to play Scio or Dayton, the 2 teams that give them the most trouble, and compete with them, the closest, one of the few teams that can keep up with Rainier. They wouldn't play them till the state final. The toughest team they might have to play is Vail, and that would be in the state semis. And all 3 of those games leading up to the final until the final would be at home. I mean, that's set up nice and peachy.
Oh yeah, no, I thought it was spring out there with the sun and everything, but they're on ice just skating. I mean, and they're a good team. They've earned it.
Right.
Even if they had tough competition, they'd probably still win.
Right.
So, I just feel bad for the teams that have to play them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, outside of baseball and softball, although we appreciate the weather for that. I mean, I think this is the first time I haven't been wearing a sweater. So, 10 podcasts in and all in the spring, and I've worn a sweater every time. So, finally, some good weather, some nice 80-degree weather to keep us warm. But an indoor sport, tennis, this weekend. I just was out at Three River Christian's girls tennis practice and talking to the Cathcart twins. And they're really excited for state. And as their coach says, they had 2 choices to make. They can go up and have fun, or they can go and try to, compete. And he said it's an obligation because we've made state to go up and compete. Mm-hmm. And they're just, for being a 1B school and competing at the 1A level, they're very athletic. They're very, they have some experience. One of them has experience at state last year. They're looking to place but just, it was fun to go out there and see a practice and see how they kind of push each other and push each other's buttons, especially as twins, to, improve one another. And Bailey Wallace, kind of the singles player also at state, kind of hops in on the action of kind of poking fun at each other. And it was just fun to see, people out in the sun enjoying themselves, but still, eyeing something bigger. So it'll be interesting to see how they do at state. And then, of course, from the fall, we have our Long's Eric Grimes, who real kind of quiet kid, but great tennis player, and he'll be competing at state. And he's eyeing, I think he took 3rd last year or something like that. Okay. He could compete for a state title. He's very good, very quiet, very nice kid. I talked to him in the fall, so he's another one to watch while at state. And then we move over to track and field, where we have Woodland girls are eyeing some sort of team trophy at Tacoma this Friday and Saturday. And after watching them at districts, they are just a great team. They get along well, they support one another, and at the heart of it is Julia Stepper. Just this, she just this. She competes in all these events, and she just, almost like an Energizer bunny, she just talks and talks and talks, and just has tons of interesting things to say. And she's out for a state title. She'll be in the 100, 200, long jump, the 4x1. It'd be cool. She ran under 12 seconds in the 100, and I know it was with a little bit of a tailwind, but that is fast.
Yes.
Fast time for 100 meters.
So let's put that into perspective. when you're driving down the street in a matter of fact, if you're in a school zone, she is running faster than you if you're driving the speed limit. To put that into perspective.
Yeah, she's good. And anytime you're competing for fastest, girl or fastest boy in the state, that's always kind of a cool thing to watch.
Right.
So I'll be up at State Track in Tacoma all weekend, and there's a lot of things to watch for, but really keep an eye on those Woodland girls and see how and where they can place. And then over in Cheney, we have a few notable things, namely Kaylin Shipley's run at a third straight javelin title.
Right.
She's doing it at a 2B level this time instead of the 1A level, so that maybe gives her some confidence to go out and break the 2B meet record. She hasn't had a chance to break that record of all the records she's broken.
Right.
She'll have another chance to finish with another record and
check another off the list there.
Yeah, and she made a bet, I think her freshman or sophomore, or I guess her sophomore year, with her coach Bob Stewart, who is in his final year coaching, that she would get his truck if she won a state title. She still hasn't gotten that truck as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And so if she wins a third, I think he has to give it to her.
I don't know. Maybe there's we talk like in the NFL. There's offset language in some of these. Maybe there's some offset language. I don't know.
But just where she's seated, she has one of the best marks in the nation. I would imagine she runs away with that event. It's what kind of personal mark she can set, and I know she's very driven to do the best she can, as a lot of these athletes are. Of course, her teammate Jasmine Cooper. She has a chance to win a state title in 3 events. I was doing the seat where people were seated going into things yesterday, and she has a realistic shot to win in the 100, the 200, and the 300 hurdles.
Okay.
That would be crazy for her to do. I don't know if she'll pull it off, but one of them certainly could. At least one of the 3 she could certainly pull off.
And that wouldn't be surprising at all.
No. Not at all. And to see where she only qualified, I think, in 300 hurdles last year. And I don't know where she placed. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But for her, just to see the amount of improvement she's had this season is crazy. I mean, a couple of years ago, she was a distance runner. Now she runs the oddest.
Sprinter.
Yeah, the sprinter and the oddest combination of sprinting and the 300 hurdles. You do not see that too often. Right. One of the most challenging distance races of the 300 hurdles paired with the 100 and 200. It's just not a very common combination, but she's able to do it, and she has a lot of success with it. So to see her, walk away with state title wouldn't be all that shocking. There's, of course, a ton more to go over, but in essence, effort to keep this somewhat short, we'll keep it at that.
For baseball season, it's going to be relatively easy. Well, he's looking this up. In what round was Mark Morris baseball coach Jason Mackey drafted by the Cleveland Indians? All right, got it.
In what round?
In what round of the Major League Baseball amateur draft was Mark Morris baseball coach Jason Mackey drafted?
To what
Simple
team?
enough. To the Cleveland Indians.
Okay. I'm glad you know it. You're even wearing a Cleveland looking
I am
right
in
now.
it sharp.
Part of last week's trivia, after this weird tangent, was Jill Bottomiller. She guessed that Kelso softball team allowed 0.9 runs per game this season during their league season. And she was correct. They allowed 9 runs in 10 league games. That's pretty impressive.
That is very impressive.
I don't care what level of competition you're facing.
No,
that's stellar.
Right.
So that's our trivia time this week. We did it in reverse order with the question and then the answer.
Yep.
But answer it on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you watch our videos. Asking the question about Jason Mackey. What round was he drafted in the MLB amateur draft?
And if you don't know, share it on Facebook.
Yeah. We need answers.
Someone will answer it.
So that's it for us this week. Once again, thanks Sterling Auto Group for sponsoring our podcast. Jason for being super knowledgeable about all the goings on of prep baseball and softball after taking the trip up to Anacortes this weekend.
Yeah.
That was fun. I heard you almost drove into the Canadian border.
Yeah, that is correct. And then I had to drive through Seattle at 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday. And
There was no traffic then, right?
Seattle drivers need to figure something out. They are terrible. How do you get that bad at driving? Anyway, that's another discussion.
You should see them in the rain. All right, that's it for us this week. Look forward to all of our coverage. Follow us on Twitter throughout the state weekend. We'll be very active there. And then check back next week for how we somehow recap all of that.